Hi everybody, welcome to Tidalwave Studio. My name is Patrick Damiani and today I would like to talk to you about saturation and show you a lot of examples how to use it. Okay, the term saturation is often used when we talk about music production, mixing, recording, but what actually is saturation? Well, to put it really simple, it is distortion and a little bit of compression. And where does it come from? Well, originally it comes from electrical components in outboard gear or in amps, in compressors. So it is harmonic distortion that is added to the original signal. In a hi-fi system, for example, like speakers with a hi-fi amp, you want as less distortion as possible. But in music production, it can be quite beneficial. But before I show you how to effectively use saturation, let's have a look at what it actually sounds like, what it looks like, and where to get it from. So I'll open up a signal generator and something to analyze. So now we have a sine wave that is playing at exactly 200 Hertz. And as we can see in the analyzer, we only have that one frequency. Now let me add in a saturator plugin. I use Saturn here. I've set it to gentle saturation, and if I engage it, you can see and hear how the sound changes. So we don't just only have that 200 Hertz bump, but now we also have some 600 Hertz, we have some 1K and a little bit more. And now if I change the saturation mode, let's go, for example, to a warm tube, we can see that it has a different overtone structure. These are harmonic distortions, so it's always the double of the previous frequency. Let's change to tape. Different again. Let's go to some heavy saturation. This is maybe something that you would get out of a guitar amp, for example. Okay, now this is a plugin designed to add saturation, so obviously you get some. But I'm not sure if you knew that almost any compressor, for example, will introduce some distortion, whether you like it or not. Let me show you this. Let's pull up again our signal generator. And now I'm going to put in a good old 1176 that we probably all already used. And now if I engage it, look at this. A lot of harmonic distortion. And one interesting thing is that it is strongly bound to the release knob of any compressor. If I have a really quick release, I have a lot of harmonic distortion. If I put the release down, there is much less harmonic distortion. This has to do with the fact that the compressor drastically changes the shape of the waveform. It's making it kind of a square waveform. I have a separate video that I talked about, like superpowers of compressors, that you can use them to your advantage, these saturation effects. And so basically almost every compressor will add some saturation if you go for a very fast release time. So you often hear that some pieces of gear really have a character and add a certain sound to a signal. Well, this is one of the main reasons. They add distortion that can be, depending on the type of gear that you use, can be very pleasant to your ear and just enriches the sound and makes it just enjoyable to listen to. Okay, so now we know where to get saturation from and what it sounds like. And now let's see how we can use it to our advantage. I'm going to show you a couple of examples of pieces of music where certain elements have saturation on them. I'll switch it on and off and show you what it actually does. The first example I want to show you is something that I really often do. This is putting saturation on shakers. If you take like a little egg shaker, it sounds thin and soon gets lost in the mix. But if you add some saturation, you can really beef it up and make it stick out. Let me show you this example.
A bad moon rises on the troubled sea. Lie awake.
So here on the left, we have a shaker that I put some saturation on. Let me switch it on and off and have a look at the meter of that shaker track. So you will see that it has a certain level whether I engage or disengage the saturation. But the perceived loudness is something completely different. So what we effectively do with the saturation is we keep the peaks at one level, but we increase the perceived loudness and the substance of the source that we're treating with saturation. And shakers take saturation really, really well. Check this out. So with saturation and without, look at the meters. It's not reading a higher peak with the saturation, but it's getting much louder. Now let's listen in context. I switch it on and off and see how the shaker just disappears in the music.
Bad moon rises on the troubled sea. A lion wakes, so maybe leave him be. Fishes climbing up the tallest tree.
So this is the perfect example of how you can use saturation to your advantage. Just make sounds much thicker and more prominent without actually using up any headroom at all. I have used this analogy a trillion times, but I'm going to repeat it one more time. I like to compare saturation to this image. Imagine a barrel that is empty and then you throw some rocks in, and those rocks are your actual instruments. But if you put in large rocks, there will be a lot of voids around, just like empty air. And if you want to increase the weight of that filled barrel, you can pour in some sand that will fill up all the voids. And saturation to me is like this sand. It really just increases the density of that whole construct and binds everything together. That's exactly, in my mind, how this works. And if you think about this and use it in that way, it can work wonders for you to get really like dense and loud mixes without using up all your headroom. Okay, let's have a look at another example out of this song. There was a Dobro Resonator guitar that has been played, and it was getting lost in the mix. And I didn't want to use like a normal compressor. I often really tend to use a saturation plugin instead of a compressor just to add what I'm missing. And this is most of the time substance and sustain and more body to an instrument. So not just like a transient spike and then nothing's coming after it, but I want it to be more consistent. So more body, more sustain. Check this out. I'll solo the Dobro just for a second. And now if I remove the saturation, as we can see again, the peak volume does not change whether I engage or disengage the saturation, but the perceived loudness definitely does. And it's maybe not so obvious solo, but listen in the music. I'll first play it with the saturation on, and then I'm going to play the same little section with saturation off, and you will see how that instrument just gets lost in the mix. Yeah, that's exactly it. We can hear the initial attack, but then all the sustain and all that nice note is just gone. You could maybe achieve a similar result with the compressor, but I often find that this just adds more weight and just a nicer sustain than a compressor, and it's somehow less obvious for the ear that something has been done to the signal. Alright, the next example that I want to show you is a metal song, and I'm going to show you saturation on vocals next. So first we have a section with some scream vocals. I'm going to play that section with a saturation on the voice, and then I switch it off, and always have a look at the meter and see that the overall measured level does not change, but the perceived loudness does.
Like just staring at my
I switch off the saturation. Can you hear how the voice is really jumping out at you when I engage the saturation? So this is really, really great tool, especially for everything that can use a little bit of aggression and a little bit of attitude, for like this vocals, for example. Oh, by the way, if you want to know how this song was recorded and mixed, we made a complete in-depth series showing absolutely every detail about it. I'm going to link to it here and in the description below. Okay, let's solo the drums in this song for a second. And let me show you what saturation can do for a snare if you want it to pop out a little bit more out of the mix. So this is the way we have it now. I already used a little bit of saturation on the snare here, but just for the sake of it, let me crank it a little bit, exaggerate it, just to see how loud the snare can really get. Of course, this is now exaggerated and I would never do this exactly like this in a mix. But if you feel that your snare is a little bit thin and a little bit small and is lacking some attitude and some sound and some power to cut through a mix, try out some saturation. This is a basic stock plugin that comes with Pro Tools, just a very regular saturation plugin, nothing fancy, nothing expensive. Okay, for the end I want to share a little trick using one of the saturator plugins that I really like to use, the FabFilter Saturn 2, which is basically a multi-band saturation tool. This is a little trick that I saw online somewhere and I thought I would like to share it with you. You know, oftentimes you have a bleed of hi-hat into your snare like this. So we can hear the cymbals, we can hear the hi-hat in the snare. But now let's pull up one instance of Saturn. And we use this dynamic button to our advantage. Let's first have a look where we have this bleed of the cymbals. That's obviously in the upper region of the frequency range. So now let's put in a high frequency band and crank this dynamics button counterclockwise. If you turn it clockwise, it will add some compression, and the other way around, it adds some kind of expansion. And listen what it does. So what it basically does is it's opening up when a hit is coming in. So you have the full attack and the full clarity of the snare, but it somehow just shuts down all the high end when the attack is gone. So it basically is like a high frequency gate for your snare. Okay, that was it for saturation. You can really see that it's a very, very, very powerful mixing tool. I use it all the time. My mixes are loud, they are dense, and it's a breeze to do this if you use saturation in the right way. Just adds so much density and you don't need to rely on limiters and clippers that much to get a really loud mix. Okay, maybe you want to have a go at trying saturation on a lot of different instruments and see what it can do for you. Just one little last tip, don't listen too much in solo when you're applying saturation. It is all a matter of context, because you will find out that sometimes an instrument will sound maybe too distorted to your ear when you listen in solo, but it's perfectly fine in context. And this is the only thing that matters. Nobody is going to listen that instrument isolated except you. So listen in context and dial in your saturation based on how that instrument sits in the mix, and you will get a loud mix, I promise it. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching until here, and see you in another episode. Bye bye.